Welcome. Thanks so much for joining us today. We're going to learn how to do these lovely braided puff stitches to make our granny square today. If you guys are just joining us for the first time, my name's Amanda. I'm the creative behind Purple Rose Crafts. I've been knitting and crocheting for over 25 years. All right, so we have grabbed some yarn. Our regular yarn for our granny squares is our Snuggly Wuggly in the big ball, and this is our lovely teal color, and I'm using a 3.5mm crochet hook. All right, so we're gonna start this row with 14 foundation single crochets. All right, so this is just going to be a base for our puff stitches. So now we're gonna start with a chain 2, go ahead and turn our work around, and now we're gonna go ahead and start our puff stitches. So to make our puff stitches a little bit angled like they are in our example, what we're going to do is we are going to yarn over, and now ordinarily we would crochet or double crochet into this first stitch here. So you guys can see that here, we would double crochet into this one. We're actually gonna skip and we're gonna double crochet into the next one over. So insert your hook through both loops at the top and yarn over and finish off our double crochet. All right, and now here's where we're going to actually make a puff stitch. So we're gonna yarn over and bring our hook back through the first stitch that we should have double crocheted, but we skipped. And now we're going to yarn over, draw up a loop, okay? Give it a little tug to make sure it's nice and loose. Yarn over again, go back down into the same stitch. Yarn over, draw up a loop, yarn over, that's twice. Yarn over, we're gonna go through a third time, draw up another loop. That's gonna give us 7 loops on our hook, and we're gonna do it a 4th time. So full puff stitch is 4 times that we're going to draw up our stitches. So you can see here, if you lose your place as you're double crocheting or as you're puff stitching here, you can see the ones that we draw up are 1, 2, 3, and 4, like so. So we have 1, 2, 3, and 4. All right, and then we yarn over and we draw through all of the loops on our hook. Give it a wiggle because sometimes you will catch an extra strand from one of our threads like I just did there. All right, and then we give it a tug to pull our loop up. Not usually that hard, but sometimes it can be a little bit difficult to get that strand from our hook all the way through. All right, and then we're gonna chain 1 to close up our puff stitch. All right, so this doesn't look like anything quite yet. Let's go ahead and do the next one. So if you can see here, this is our double crochet stitch, which is this part here is our double crochet. Then we have our puff stitch. So now we need to skip over. We're gonna put our puff stitch here, so we need to put our double crochet in the next one. So we're gonna yarn over and down in here, do a double crochet, like so. And now we're gonna come back and put another puff stitch in here. Yarn over, down through the stitch, yarn over, draw up a loop, yarn over, draw up a second loop, yarn over, draw up a third, and then finally a 4th one. Okay, so now we should have each of our yarn overs, each of our loops that we drew up, which is 8, and then the original one that we started with, which is 9 loops on our hook. If you wanted to spread those out and count them, that's where we're at, okay? So we're gonna wiggle our hook a little back and forth to get it through, and yarn over, and chain to finish off our puff stitch. Okay, so now that we have 2 of them, you can see that they're kind of slanted to the left. All right, so that is what we're looking for, because we're going to, essentially we're gonna create the granny square this direction, back and forth like this, like so, and then it's gonna look like this super cute braided pattern, okay? So, yarn over again, skip the next stitch into the next one over, and double crochet, and then we're going to come back into the one that we skipped, yarn over, draw up our first loop, make sure it stays nice and loose, yarn over 2, yarn over 3, and yarn over 4, and draw up our 4 loops, wiggle our yarn through the puff stitch, and chain to close it off. Okay, now a regular puff stitch would actually be done just straight up and down like so. So So I skipped over a stitch here because puff stitches are wider than normal. 3 and 4. So then if we draw through all the loops and close it off, that's the difference. So you can see here what just happened. This is our regular puff stitch. It's very vertical, but because we did it over top of the double crochet on this one, it is actually going to slant to the left for us. Okay, and then when we turn our work to come back, we're going to continue doing these puff stitches diagonally, which is going to create the opposite row. So this one, because we're going to work it from this side here, working our direction to the left again, it's going to look slanted again to the left, but because we're turning our work around, it's going to alternate back and forth with the puff stitches. So this is the difference between our slanted puff stitch and our straight up and our straight puff stitch, okay? So you can use puff stitches anywhere you like. Just keep in mind they are wider than a regular stitch, so you don't want to do them in every single stitch along our row, okay? Because it does fill out your fabric a lot. All right, so let's go back. We will go ahead and finish off our row and come back in just a moment. So just keep in mind that you want to have an even number of stitches on your row for this granny square, because we want to use our chain 2 as our beginning anchor point, and we want to be able to finish with the double crochet at the end of the row to give us a second anchoring point. Okay, so an even number of stitches, and each of our stitches is a multiple of 2 as well, so everything should stay nice and even with, you know, 14 or 16 stitches depending on how large your granny squares are. All right, so here we are coming up to the end of the row, and what we actually have happening here is a little bit of curling down towards the beginning of the row here. That's normal, it kind of does that, but it's not a big deal because once we get another row on top of it, it'll straighten out. All right, now you can see what's happening here. It looks like we have too many stitches on our beginning row, but that's because we haven't done our final double crochet into that final, or into that original stitch from the bottom of the row as our final anchoring point. So we want to go ahead and double crochet into that. All right, so there's our final finished row number 2 after our foundation row. And so now we're going to chain 2 here to begin our row, turn our work around, and we're going to go ahead and follow along just as we did in the first row back across our granny square. So we're going to yarn over. Now what we're looking at here is our stitches. So in order to go ahead and make our braid, we want to make sure that our puff stitch goes into this stitch here. So it's just ahead of the puff from the previous row. We want to put our puff stitch into this stitch here because it is the chain for the end of our previous puff stitch. So we want to actually make sure that we're going to come over and kind of weave back and forth for our puff stitch. So our double crochet is going to go into the top of the puff stitch from the row below. So that's our double crochet. And now we're going to come back into our closing chain, and that's where we're going to do our puff stitch. 2, 3, and 4. Okay, keep everything nice and loose, and then wiggle to get our hook through. Okay, so there we go, closing that off. And now you can see it's kind of starting to weave in the front. Now, if you are concerned that you don't feel like it's crossing enough, you can do it into the hole here between our puff stitches and our double crochet at the end of the row. That's fine as well. Okay, so we're gonna skip over the first one and the second, and we're going to go back into the top of the puff stitch from the previous row and double crochet there, and then we're going to come back across and make our puff stitch into that closing chain. So there's our 4, wiggle and close it. Okay. So once we turn it around to go back and look at our front, there's what we have that we're looking at here. So this one I actually did into the chain stitch. This one I did into the space. And so it's up to you which way you want it to look. You can see here, this one's done into the chain space and this one is done into the space between the two puff stitches. So you can decide which way you want it to look. And we're just going to continue working in this fashion. Now I did change colors in our original swatch for every second row. I changed colors to kind of give us some contrast here with our granny square blanket. You could do that. You don't have to do that. You can keep it all one solid color. Completely up to you. And so we're going to go ahead and keep going. And then when we finished our square, what I did is I single crocheted all the way around the outside to give us a nice anchoring of white. Now I have single crocheted all the way around the outside of this one. You can make your square a little bit smaller and do a double crochet row on the outside if you want a little bit more white in between your squares. That's completely an option as well. I've done a bunch of granny squares, so if you guys want to check that playlist out, I do talk about how to go around the outside of each square.
And if you're looking for the pattern for this one, it'll be linked in the description below.
This is our braided puff stitch granny square. I hope you guys like it. If you like this granny square, go ahead and hit that like button and hit subscribe if you guys want to stick around for more granny squares and lots more videos coming in the future. Thanks so much for hanging out with us. We'll see you next time.